What is obesity? I'm 43 years old, personal trainer. I've done all the things that used to work for me. Counting macros, keeping my calories around 2,000 to keep up with my workouts, all of it. Nothing works. My weight just keeps rising. That's a real comment from one of you, a personal trainer, someone who understands exercise physiology, someone who tracks every variable, and it stopped working. This is the first episode in a 10-part series explaining what obesity actually is, how it works, what drives it, and why the model most of medicine and all of fitness culture uses to explain it is incomplete. If you've been doing everything right and your body changed anyway, this series is for you. Let's start with a definition. Obesity is a chronic, relapsing disease driven by excess adipose tissue. It has multiple causes: genetic, environmental, hormonal, and neurobiological. The American Medical Association classified it as a disease in 2013. The American Board of Obesity Medicine exists because treating it well requires clinical training. Chronic means it persists over time. Relapsing means the body works actively to return to its defended fat mass or set point. That's the first thing most people get wrong. They think obesity is a behavior. Eat too much, move too little, fix the equation, done. This is what most of the gym bros in my comments think. It's what most healthcare professionals still believe. It's inadequate, and it's the reason obesity is still viewed as a moral failure. Your brain controls this. The hypothalamus is an area in your brain. It functions as the body's energy regulator. It receives signals from fat tissue, the gut, the pancreas, and the brain's reward system. These signals govern hunger, fullness, and resting energy expenditure. In obesity, this signaling gets really messed up. Leptin, secreted by fat tissue to signal adequate energy stores and tell you you're full, loses its effectiveness. Ghrelin, the primary hunger-driving hormone, goes up. The hypothalamus reads existing fat mass as insufficient and generates signals to defend it and restore it. You can be carrying significant excess fat mass. Your brain behaves as though you're starving. Hunger stays elevated, fullness comes late or barely at all. This is happening at the level of the brain. It is receptor level physiology. Discipline isn't the differentiator here in this scenario. The reward system is part of it. Your brain has a system that makes you feel good when you eat. That's dopamine. Dopamine is why your food is pleasurable. It's why eating feels rewarding. That system exists because your brain needs you to eat to survive. In obesity, the system changes. The dopamine response to food gets weaker over time. You eat the same meal, the pleasure signal is weaker, so your brain asks for more. More food, more often, more calorie dense, because it's chasing a signal it used to get easily, and now it can't. You experience this as cravings, as thinking about food all day, as eating past fullness and still wanting more. That's your dopamine system asking for a signal while your receptors are no longer delivering. This is measurable, documented, published, and completely invisible to you. You just feel like you can't stop thinking about food. When a gym bro tells you it's all about discipline, he's giving you a behavioral explanation for a neurochemical event. He's wrong. And the confidence with which he's wrong makes it worse. Genetics set the foundation. The heritability of obesity is estimated between 40 and 70%. That means your genetics account for roughly half to 2/3 of where you end up on the weight spectrum. Specific gene variants alter leptin receptor function. They alter dopamine signaling. They alter basal metabolic rate. Your genetics determine how much it takes for the environment and your hormones to move you into disease territory. One of you commented, "I watch my husband eat 2 or 3 or 4,000 calories a day with lots of sugar and no weight gain, yet I have to push my calories to next to nothing for weeks just to lose a pound or 2. That's genetics. Her body and her husband's body process energy differently. Different hormones, different metabolism, different biology. The calories in, calories out model assumes they're the same, but they're not. The environment stacks on top. Ultra-processed food is engineered to bypass the hypothalamic satiety system. It delivers caloric density without triggering the fullness signals that whole food produces. The food industry spends billions engineering products that override your biology. Then the fitness industry tells you it's your fault. Chronic sleep disruptions shifts ghrelin and leptin in the same direction as caloric restriction. Hunger rises, satiety falls, even without changing what you eat. Stress-mediated cortisol elevation compounds this further. Cortisol promotes visceral fat deposition. It worsens insulin resistance. It disrupts sleep, which cycles back to appetite. These inputs stack. Genetics is the foundation, environment compounds it, and the hypothalamus runs the response. So what happens when you restrict calories? Caloric restriction triggers a predictable sequence. Resting energy expenditure drops, ghrelin rises, satiety hormones fall. These are peptide YY, cholecystokinin, and leptin. Hunger intensifies, and all the while your body burns less. Sumathran and colleagues published data in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2011 showing these appetite-related hormones remained altered 1 year after significant weight loss. Your body's push to regain continued long after the fat was gone. This is what we call metabolic defense. Your body defends fat mass the way it defends temperature. Sustained caloric restriction triggers a biological response proportional to the threat of fat loss. Short-term interventions produce long-term results followed by a predictable return to the defended mass or set point. This pattern repeats across decades of obesity research, and yet the advice hasn't changed. Eat less, move more, try harder, track better. That advice was developed predominantly in populations with stable hormonal environments. Young men, steady testosterone, predictable energy partitioning, muscle-preserving metabolism. Midlife women do not have a stable hormonal environment, and no one adjusted the model. A 2024 report from the National Academies found that less than 8% of NIH research spending from 2013 to 2023 targeted women's health. That share actually decreased as a proportion of overall funding, even as the NIH budget grew. Newer information puts women's health funding between 10% and 11% of the NIH budget, still woefully inadequate. Menopause doesn't even have its own research tracking code at the NIH, but erectile dysfunction does. Half the population goes through menopause. It affects metabolism, body composition, cardiovascular risk, bone density, cognition, and sleep, and it doesn't have a tracking code. That's where the research priorities are, and that's whose physiology the standard advice was built on. And then midlife happens. Estrogen modulates insulin sensitivity, fat distribution, and resting energy expenditure. As estrogen fluctuates and declines across the perimenopause transition, visceral fat accumulates preferentially. The study of women's health across the nation documented that the rate of fat gain doubles for 2 years before the final menstrual period, while lean mass declines. One study found significant increases in visceral fat with no measurable change in total body mass or waist circumference. This tells us the fat redistributed, and the scale stayed the same. Resting energy expenditure declines during the menopause transition. Some data attribute this primarily to aging. Other data show menopause-specific effects on energy expenditure independent of age. The evidence is still being sorted out. But what's consistent across studies is that midlife women burn less at rest than they did a decade earlier. So a woman who eats the same way for 10 years through the menopause transition gains weight independent of her behavior. Visceral fat is not passive storage. Adipose tissue, particularly visceral fat, functions as an active endocrine organ. It secretes inflammatory cytokines, TNF-alpha, interleukin-6, and resistin, that drive insulin resistance, cardiovascular risk, and systemic inflammation. This is what we call lipotoxicity, and it explains why body composition matters more than the number on the scale. The normal labs trap. Maybe your doctor ran a standard panel, fasting glucose, thyroid, cholesterol, hemoglobin A1C. Those are threshold tests. They tell you whether you've crossed a clinical line. They don't tell you what's happening on the way to that line. Fasting insulin can be elevated for years before glucose rises. Inflammatory markers driven by visceral fat don't appear on a basic metabolic panel. Body composition can shift dramatically while the scale stays the same. Your labs come back normal. You're told to track your intake more and more carefully. The disease is progressing. The panel doesn't see it yet. And then there's the problem with access. One of you commented, "I can't afford GLP-1s and they won't approve them because I'm not diabetic." Another said, "It's really shitty that insurance does not cover some of the cost, especially for people in menopause. Why not have something preventative? But until we get really sick, then insurance will cover." She's right. And this is my clinical opinion based on what I see in practice every week. Insurance companies have a financial incentive to not classify obesity as a disease requiring treatment because the moment they do, they have to cover the treatment. So they wait until you develop diabetes, until you develop heart disease, until the complications generate enough billing codes to justify intervention. That's insurance companies practicing medicine, and they are practicing it badly. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical companies charge $1,000 a month for medications that cost a fraction of that to produce. The disease is real, the treatments exist, and the system places them behind a wall that most women can't climb. So, what is obesity? It's a chronic, relapsing disease driven by neurohormonal signaling, genetic predisposition, environmental inputs, and hormonal shifts, compounded in midlife by estrogen decline, visceral fat accumulation, and metabolic adaptation. It's not a lifestyle choice. It's not a failure of discipline. It is not a math problem. Treating this disease requires understanding the neurohormonal signaling that drives the body to return to its set point. It requires understanding how hormonal shifts alter metabolic function across your life. It requires clinical pattern recognition built on years of managing this specific population. I'm board certified in obesity medicine. My practice focuses on midlife women with complex metabolic and hormonal disease. This is episode 1 of 10. Over this series, I'm going to walk you through every mechanism I just touched on in depth, one at a time. Why your body defends fat mass, how menopause changes metabolism, why caloric restriction stops working, what sleep disruption does to your body composition, what insulin resistance looks like, what GLP-1 medications actually do, and what treatment looks like when it's done right. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. For more education, grounded in physiology and not blame, visit drgordon.me.